I stumbled into my farmhouse, reeking of damp earth, beside a two-headed cat mimicking my stride. Each paw strike on the packed dirt matched my left heel's thud, the rhythm sinking like a metronome counting down. My night shift scanning empty fields had left my skin cold and tight, the scent of rain on dry earth clinging to my uniform. The cat's head swiveled in perfect unison as I approached the porch, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the gas lamp I'd forgotten to turn off. One head tilted toward the hole in the backyard, the other toward the farmhouse, tongues flicking like twin serpents tasting the air. The industrial hum beneath my feet vibrated through my molars, a low-frequency thrum that drowned out the crickets and the distant sound of falling snow. I knelt beside the hole, its edges unnervingly sharp, like a knife cut into the earth. It smelled of ancient paper and wet stone, a scent that clung to the back of my throat. The cat pressed against my leg, its fur rasping against my jeans like sandpaper, the two heads now tracking my movements with unnerving precision. I reached into the hole, fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. It was a stone mask, its surface etched with symbols that tasted like old iron on my tongue. The runes seemed to shift when I looked away, then settle back into place. I lifted it, the weight surprising. The mask whispered, not in words but in vibrations that traveled up my arm, a low thrumming that matched the industrial hum in the air. The sound of falling snow seemed to echo in the mask's hollows, a soft crunch like ice breaking underfoot. I turned the mask over, the runes glowing faintly molten lead in the darkness. The cat's head snapped into focus, both eyes now fixed on the mask, the glow intensifying. One head tilted left, the other right, their movements perfectly mirrored, the tongues flicking faster now, tasting the air like twin serpents. The mask's whisper deepened, a vibration in my palm like a trapped insect. The hole's edges seemed to drain color, the blackness swallowing the last traces of slate gray, leaving only the cold stone and the cat's glowing eyes. The industrial hum shifted, becoming a pressure behind my eyes, a sound that felt like the weight of the library's forgotten books pressing down. I felt the mask's secrets seep into my skin, the Viking runes burning cold against my palm. The cat stopped mimicking, its bodies rigid, heads tilted in perfect, unnatural unison, the glow in its eyes now the only light in the world. The hole's edges drained the last color from the air, leaving only the mask's cold stone and the cat's eyes burning molten lead in the darkness. The weight settled, a damp, suffocating pressure. I forced the stone mask over my face. It clung like wet leather, the cold seeping through the thin layer of skin. Thorn burden. It whispered, not a voice, but a vibration that resonated in the bones of my skull, a tremor in the marrow. The word wasn't spoken. It became sensation. A damp chill blossomed across my neck, a sudden visceral understanding of what it meant to carry something. The kitchen bulb flickered, a frantic pulse against the oppressive darkness beyond the doorway. Its filament buzzed like dry parchment tearing, a brittle rasp that scratched at the edges of my awareness. The hum, that constant underlying tremor, seemed to amplify the sound, pulling it out, stretching it thin. I checked the bulb, half expecting it to shatter, to plunge me into absolute black. It held a pathetic, sputtering defiance. Then the mask heated. A sudden, intense warmth bloomed across my face, radiating outwards. I instinctively raised a hand, felt the skin prickling, tightening. A single drop of molten lead, shockingly hot, landed on my wrist. It wasn't pain, not precisely. More like a violation, a brand marking me. The smell of burnt sugar, sickly sweet and cloying, filled my nostrils. I stared at the spot, expecting to see a blister, a mark, but there was nothing visible. Just the lingering heat, the phantom scent, the cat. I turned, expecting to find it frozen, transfixed by the mask's glow. It wasn't. It nodded, both heads moving in perfect, unsettling unison. A slow, deliberate dip, like acknowledging a shared secret. The motion wasn't fluid, but jerky, segmented, as if controlled by separate unseen mechanisms. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a prickling of unease. It was observing me, analyzing me, assessing my worthiness of whatever the mask held. The weight of the mask pressed down not just physically but mentally. A cascade of images, fragmented and distorted, flickered behind my eyelids. Faces I didn't recognize, places I'd never been. A flash of snow, a glimpse of a frozen lake. The metallic tang of blood on my tongue. It was a memory, but not mine. Or perhaps it was a memory buried so deep, so suppressed, that it had become alien, the unspoken truth. The night I failed, the farmhouse, the rain, the silence. The hum deepened, resonating not just in my ears, but in my teeth, in the very bones of my jaw. It vibrated the salt shaker on the counter, making it tremble. The fine grains of salt shifted within the glass, a silent avalanche of tiny crystalline particles. I could feel the vibration in my sinuses, a pressure building behind my eyes. My breath hitched, a wave of nausea rolled over me, a sudden overwhelming sense of guilt. It wasn't a rational guilt, not something I could articulate. It was a primal instinctive feeling, a deep-seated certainty that I was responsible for something terrible, something I couldn't name. The mask pulsed, the runes glowing brighter now, casting an eerie leaden light across the kitchen. I saw my reflection in the darkened window. A stranger stared back, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something akin to recognition. The man in the reflection seemed older, wearier, burdened by a knowledge he shouldn't possess. The cat shifted, its rasping fur brushing against my ankle. The sound was amplified in the silence, a grating, insistent reminder of its presence. I felt a compulsion to look at it, to seek some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance, but I couldn't. The gaze felt too intense, too knowing. The memories pressed harder, fragments of conversations, snippets of laughter, the echoing sound of a child's cry. The scent of wood smoke and wet wool filled my nostrils, triggering a visceral longing for a past I couldn't quite grasp. The taste of iron coated my tongue, bitter and metallic. The hum intensified, blurring the edges of reality. The kitchen seemed to stretch, to distort. The shadows deepened, swallowing the already meager light. I felt a disorientation, a sense of unreality. Was I standing in the kitchen? Or was I somewhere else entirely? Somewhere colder, darker, more desolate? The mask tightened its grip, the leather-like surface pressing against my skin. "Burden," it whispered again, the vibration intensifying, resonating deep within my soul. I wanted to rip it off, to tear it away from my face, but I couldn't. My hands felt heavy, unresponsive. My will felt absent. The cat nodded again, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down my spine. The two heads perfectly synchronized, their eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. A single drop of molten lead, another searing brand, bloomed on my wrist. I dragged the lead-stained rug from the hallway, its edges peeling like sun-bleached bone. The cat's breath was a damp chill on my neck, a sudden sharp pressure against my ear, a nip that echoed like distant thunder in the silent house. A cold, metallic tang bloomed where teeth met flesh, tiny spots of lead searing into skin. I felt them, each one an echo of something long past. The rug's dry crackle dominated the hum, amplifying it somehow, pulling it out from its usual subterranean drone to a harsh rasp against my eardrums. The sound was insistent, grating like nails scraping down a chalkboard buried deep in my skull. It vibrated through me, resonating with every beat of my heart. The cats' heads pressed closer, their breath smelling of wet stone and something else, something rotten, decayed. A scent that triggered a memory long forgotten, a taste bitter on the back of my tongue, a taste of guilt, of shame. The hum seemed to intensify at this revelation, as if feeding off it. The salt shaker rattled in its spot on the counter, a sudden staccato dance against the unyielding granite. Then silence, absolute and deafening. I knew what had happened even before my hand reached out to confirm. It was empty now. Nothing but smooth glass under my fingertips. The hum had consumed it. I felt the weight of that truth settle in my stomach like a stone. The cat carried something with it, some essence tied up in its dual forms and ancient eyes. It carried the soul of... No, I refused to think about him. Not here, not now, but I knew. And so did the hum. A sudden darkness descended, swift and complete, all light sources failing simultaneously. The kitchen plunged into chaos, a cacophony of sounds amplified by the absence of sight, the metallic rasp of fur against floorboards, the distant echo of a drip somewhere unseen, the distorted hiss of wind through empty rooms. My breath was loud in my ears, ragged and panicked. I reached out, fingers brushing against cold, smooth countertop, granite like frozen water under my touch. I followed it to its edge, then traced along until my hand closed around something familiar, the handle of the knife block. Each drawer slid open with a protesting squeal, revealing their empty insides one by one, until finally there it was, a single blade left behind. The cat's breath changed tempo, becoming quicker, shallower. It knew what I held. The weight in my hand seemed to grow heavier, denser, an extension of the burden on my face. This wasn't just a knife. It was an answer, a solution to the gnawing guilt inside me. I turned towards where I last heard its rasping breath. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. The hum, the wind, even my own thoughts. All that existed was this moment, this choice. Then something cold and wet touched my ankle, a single drop of molten lead falling onto skin already marked by too many brands. The cat carried his soul, and now it wanted mine. I pressed my palm flat against the wallpaper's textured surface, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin as if anticipating what was to come. The lead-stained pattern beneath my fingertips felt heavy, like Viking armor ready for battle, rather than mere decoration on an old farmhouse wall. I could almost hear echoes of ancient chants resonating from its depths, the rhythmic pulse matching the insistent hum that seemed to have taken up residence in my skull. The hum vibrated through me, setting my teeth on edge and making them ache with a dull throb that mirrored the pulsation against my palm. It was as if the wall itself breathed, inhaling deeply only to exhale sharply, a harsh rasp like nails scraping down chalkboard after chalkboard buried deep within its core. A lead-colored shadow moved just beyond my vision, flickering at the edge of my peripheral sight, but disappearing whenever I turned towards it directly. My heart pounded in response, each beat reverberating through me and amplifying the hum until it felt like an earthquake was building beneath my feet. The salt shaker rattled violently on the countertop behind me, its glass surface clinking against granite with a discordant rhythm that seemed to mock the order of things. I reached out towards the window latch, fingers brushing against cold metal before wrapping around it tightly. But instead of turning easily under my touch, it froze solid, an icy tendril coiling around my hand like a serpent, preparing for strike. As I stared in disbelief at our locked embrace, frost began to creep across its surface, spreading outwards until every inch was coated in leaden white. The cats' heads turned towards the shadow simultaneously, their eyes glowing brighter with each passing second, as if feeding off some unseen energy pulsating through the room. Its breath came quicker now, shallower two sets of lungs inhaling sharply before exhaling together on a hiss that echoed eerily around us like wind whistling through empty rooms. Realization dawned slowly but surely within me, a creeping dread that felt heavier than any physical weight could ever be. The wall wasn't stained. It was alive, breathing with the hum, throbbing with some ancient power I couldn't begin to comprehend, let alone control. And whatever burden weighed upon my chest like a millstone around my neck, it wasn't just guilt or shame anymore. It was a sentence, a punishment carved into stone and whispered through leaden shadows, a verdict handed down by someone or something that held dominion over this desolate world we found ourselves trapped in together. The cat, the wall, me. A sudden chill ran down my spine as if an unseen hand traced its length with icy fingers. The burden wasn't just a secret anymore. It was tangible, real, a physical force pressing against me from all sides like walls closing in around their prey before devouring them whole. The hum seemed to grow louder still, reverberating within the very marrow of my bones until I felt like nothing more than an empty vessel waiting to be filled with its dark purpose. And then, without warning, everything went silent, all sound swallowed up by some unseen force that left only absolute emptiness behind, including the hum itself. The click was almost insignificant, a brittle release of tension as the switch surrendered to my will. Then nothing, not darkness precisely. Absence, a complete and utter cessation of illumination that felt less like the absence of light and more like the active consumption of it. The hum, which had been a background thrum, a persistent annoyance, instantly amplified, burrowing into my bones, vibrating through my teeth until they ached with a dull, insistent pressure. It wasn't a sound anymore, it was a feeling, a physical manifestation of dread. I inhaled, a shallow, panicked gasp that tasted of dust and something metallic, something ancient and unsettling. The air itself seemed to thicken, to press against my skin like a damp shroud. The lead-stained wallpaper, previously a source of unsettling visual detail, vanished into the oppressive blackness. I could feel its texture, though, too. The raised patterns, the cold, clammy surface tiffy-fiss, as if my fingertips were the only things tethered to reality. The two-headed cat, which had been observing me with those unnervingly bright eyes, pressed against my chest. Not a gentle nudge, but a deliberate weighty placement of its heads, cold and heavy against my sternum. The fur, a coarse, slate-grey, rasped against the fabric of my uniform, a dry, whispering sound that amplified the unsettling silence. The sound wasn't vocalized so much as it was felt, a vibration transmitted through bone and muscle, a shared tremor of unease. My hand instinctively went to the stone mask, the cold, smooth surface, a stark contrast to the clammy wallpaper and the rasping fur against my chest. It felt heavier now, the weight pressing against my temple, a constant reminder of... What? I couldn't quite grasp it. A memory, perhaps, a responsibility, a curse. Oh, Sana, oh, to within my mind, a silent whisper that resonated with the hum, amplifying its power. It wasn't a voice, exactly, more like a resonant frequency. I'd chosen the arrogance of it. The sheer audacity of the claim should have been insulting, but somehow it felt right. A confirmation of something I'd always suspected, that I was different, that I was meant for something more than guarding a crumbling farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Oh, the cats' heads moved in perfect synchronicity, mimicking the rhythm of my heartbeat. A thump, thump, a thump, each pulse a drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I could smell it now, Twinny. A cloying, earthy odor emanating from the cat, a scent of iron and ancient soil like freshly turned earth after a long, forgotten winter. It was the smell of something buried, something waiting to be unearthed. The smell of something twindy-old. I shifted, trying to dislodge the cat, but its grip was surprisingly firm, its claws digging into my uniform. A tremor ran through my body, a wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. The hum intensified, a physical pressure against my eardrums, a vibration that seemed to unravel the very fabric of my being. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a judgment, a reckoning, a memory surfaced, unbidden, unwelcome. A flash of a face, distorted and terrified, a choked gasp, the smell of rain and something else, something metallic, something final. I pushed the memory away, dismissing it as a phantom, a trick of the darkness. I was chosen, I was special, such things couldn't possibly be my fault. The hum morphed subtly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't just a vibration now, it was a weaving, a complex tapestry of frequencies that seemed to be folding reality itself. I felt a disorientation, a sense of displacement, as if the room were rotating, shifting on its axis. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had crossed a line. The hum wasn't merely an atmospheric phenomenon, it was a conduit, a gateway, and I had opened it. The farmhouse wasn't just a building, it was a nexus. A focal point for something ancient and terrible, and I, Gabriel Allen, security guard, was standing at the epicenter, another whisper, this one laced with something darker, something hungry. The cat pressed its two lead-colored heads harder against my chest, its weight a crushing burden. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back, soaking my uniform. The hum resonated within me, a relentless pulse that threatened to shatter my sanity. The air grew thick, heavy, almost viscous. It tasted of copper and decay. The universe was waiting for my final decision. A choice I didn't understand, a responsibility I hadn't asked for, but I knew somehow that I couldn't refuse. The weight of the mask pressed against my temple, a physical manifestation of the burden I carried. The hum swelled, a tidal wave of sound that threatened to drown me. The cat's breath, a constant, rasping hiss against my ear, intensified. It smelled of iron and something else, something ancient. The glass shards slipped from my fingers, a clumsy fumble born of disorientation and the insistent thrumming that had become the baseline of my existence. It wasn't a crash, not exactly, more of a dispersal, a crystalline fracturing that resonated with a sound. Wrong! It wasn't the brittle snap of silica, but something colder, something distant. Like the sound of falling snow, but inside my skull. Sish. Each tiny fragment as it struck the lead-stained floor echoed that delicate, deceptive fall. The sound wasn't localized. It permeated the room, layering itself over the hum, creating a hollow, echoing melody that tightened my throat. A winter's lament, I hadn't realized I was moving until my foot found purchase on something slick. Not water, not exactly, thicker, greasier. Lead. A puddle, reflecting nothing, absorbing the darkness, spreading like a stain. My boot slid, a slow, inevitable descent. The cold wasn't immediate. It seeped, insinuated itself through the worn leather, a creeping numbness that climbed my ankle, my calf. It felt less like cold and more like the absence of warmth, a void where heat should be. The floor, already uneven, shifted beneath me. I flailed, a useless attempt at regaining balance, my hand grasping for something, anything. The cat's weight shifted, its two heads pressing harder against my chest, a desperate counterweight. Its breathing, previously a slow, measured rasp, accelerated. Sniff, sniff, sniff. The air around its nostrils visibly disturbed, the slate-grey fur rippling with each inhalation. It wasn't searching for me, not exactly. It was testing the air, sampling the darkness, assessing what? A threat, a change. Or simply the scent of decay, the iron tang, already present, intensified, clinging to the back of my throat. It tasted like old pennies and wet earth. I managed to arrest my fall, but not before my shoulder slammed against the wall. The lead-stained wallpaper, cold and damp, felt like skin stretched over bone. The raised patterns, previously discernible, blurred into a seamless, oppressive texture. I pressed my palm against it, seeking some sense of stability, some connection to reality. The wallpaper felt wrong, not just the texture, but the material itself. It wasn't paper, not entirely. There was something else woven into it, something fibrous, something organic, like dried seaweed pressed into a pulp. The mask. I instinctively reached for it, my fingers tracing the smooth, cold surface. It felt heavier now, the weight pressing against my temple, a constant reminder of its purpose. Or, rather, Thor's purpose, not mine. The hum resonated through the stone, vibrating against my skull. And then, a whisper, not audible, not exactly, a pressure against my mind, a psychic imprint, victim. The word wasn't accusatory, or even judgmental. It was a statement of fact, a cold, detached observation. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out. But the darkness behind my eyelids was no escape. It was the same darkness that filled the room, the same darkness that seemed to be seeping into my soul. The snowfall sound continued, a delicate, insidious intrusion. It wasn't the sound of winter's beauty. It was the sound of erasure. Of obliteration, each falling flake, a tiny fragment of memory dissolving into the void. The puddle had spread, the lead slickness coating the floor. I tried to lift my foot, but it was stuck, mired in the viscous substance. A slow, sickening realization dawned. This wasn't a spill. This wasn't an accident. The lead wasn't merely fouquent. The floor. It was toydy becoming the floor. The farmhouse wasn't just decaying. It was transforming, melding with something else. Something ancient. Something hungry. The cat's breath came faster, its two heads sniffing the air with frantic urgency. The smell of iron intensified, mingling with the earthy scent of decay. It smelled like a tomb, like a forgotten crypt unearthed after centuries of slumber. I could feel the weight of its gaze, those unnervingly bright eyes boring into me, dissecting my fear, measuring my despair. It knew, it always knew. The hum intensified, a physical pressure against my eardrums. The snowfall sound warped, distorted, becoming less like falling snow and more like the grinding of bone. The two sounds intertwined, creating a dissonant, unsettling harmony, a funeral dirge for a future I hadn't even known I'd lost. I was drowning not in water, not in darkness, but in the weight of my own truth. The truth that I wasn't chosen. I wasn't special. I was merely a vessel. A container for something ancient and terrible. The mask pressed against my skin, a cold, smooth weight. The whisper echoed in my mind. Foot victim. My foot slipped again, this time fully submerged. The lead was shockingly cold, a numbing, creeping paralysis that threatened to engulf my entire leg. I felt a sharp, stinging pain, a searing cold that traveled up my nerve endings. I was sinking slowly, inevitably sinking into the lead. The cat's weight shifted, its two heads now pressing against my face, obscuring my vision. The sound was deafening. The snowfall sound was gone, replaced by a hollow, echoing silence, and then only the hum. The mask's weight shifted as I exhaled. A slow, deliberate breath meant to steady my nerves, but it didn't. My fingers twitched toward the cat's fur. The slate-grey strand stiff with something like static, like the air before a storm that never breaks. The two heads turned in unison, their ears flattening against the fur, their eyes, oh God, their eyes' pupils dilated into black voids, reflecting nothing but the hum itself. The low-frequency thrum pulsed through the room, vibrating the wallpaper, making the fibers of the lead-stained walls shudder like skin. I swallowed. My throat tightened. A sound clawed its way up from my chest. Not a gasp, not quite, more like the wet fitchlick of a blade dragging across a throat that hadn't been cut yet. The cat's heads pressed against my palm first, cold as a corpse's fingers, but not quite dead. The fur bristled under my touch, each strand vibrating with a sound like the slow unraveling of thread. The victim! The mask whispered, but this time it wasn't a word. It was a pressure, a weight settling over my shoulders like the chains of a drowned man. My fingers curled into the fur, and the moment I did, the hum split. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a tearing. A slow, deliberate, furry AP that started in my own throat, rising from the back of my mouth, vibrating my teeth. The cat's heads jerk back, their nostrils flaring, and I tasted copper, not blood. Worse, the taste of my own voice unraveling. The snowfall sound returned, a delicate thudish that slithered into the room through the cracks in the floorboards, through the seams of the walls. It wasn't falling now. It was swin melting. Each flake landed with a sound like wet parchment, like the slow decay of something written in ink that wasn't meant to fade. The cat's breath hitched, a sharp, wet his sniff, and the two heads dipped lower, pressing harder against my chest. The weight wasn't just physical. It was the weight of a secret, a sin, a failure. I saw him again, the young guard, his uniform still crisp with the starch of the night shift, his eyes wide with the same terror I'd failed to save him from, his soul pressed against my ribs, a cold, damp thing that smelled of rust and old pennies. The cat's fur rippled with the memory of him, with the sound of his last breath, with the way his body had hit the floor. The hum intensified, a physical force now, pressing against my eardrums, shaking the bones in my skull. The tearing sound in my throat deepened, a wet, ragged footeroo. Not a scream, not yet. A warning. The cat's heads pressed closer, their breath warm against my skin, their bodies trembling. I could feel the soul of the guard shifting, heavy as a stone in the cat's belly, pressing against my chest, against my ribs, against the mask. The victim, the mask whispered again, but this time it wasn't a word. It was a judgment. It was the sound of a truth unraveling. The cat's paws flexed against the lead-stained floor, the claws scraping against the viscous surface with a sound like wet paper being torn. The snowfall sound warped, stretching into something longer, something human, a sob, a plea, a name. The guard's name, Shensen. It echoed through the room, through the hum, through the tearing in my throat. The cat's heads pressed harder, their eyes wide, their pupils swallowing the darkness. I could feel the soul of Jensen pressing against my own, a cold, damp weight that smelled of iron and wet earth. I could feel the mask pressing against my temple, whispering, "Victim, victim, victim, victim!" The cat's heads jerked back, and the sound of tearing stopped. The hum remained, a low, steady pulse, but the snowfall sound was gone, replaced by silence, not the absence of sound. The absence of Tuvir. The cat turned, its steps silent but heavy, each paw print sinking into the lead like a footprint in snow. The weight of Jensen's soul lingered, pressing against my chest, against my ribs, against the mask. The cat walked away, its fur rippling with the sound of a memory that wasn't mine. The hum continued, a constant, unrelenting reminder. The mask pressed cold against my temple. "The victim," it whispered. And this time I believed it. I pushed against the lead-stained floorboards, the grit scraping against my palms. Each movement sent a shiver through the mask, a cold tickle against my temple. "Tim Burden is mine," it breathed. Not into my ear, but directly into the bone behind it. The hum resonated through my teeth, a dull ache that had become the baseline of my existence. It wasn't a sound I heard anymore. It was a pressure, a weight in my chest, a constant reminder of the arrangement I had to see. I needed to see what lay beyond the hole. It wasn't a gaping maw, not a ragged tear in the earth. It was precise, deliberate. A perfect circle cut into the overgrown grass, as if bored through with a tool of impossible sharpness. The air radiating from it wasn't cold, not exactly. It was empty, like the space between breaths. The snowfall sound had vanished, and the silence felt heavier, more viscous. It clung to my skin like oil. I lowered myself, elbows digging into the damp earth. The smell of the farm was gone, replaced by something else. Old paper dust, a metallic tang like old blood. The descent was slow, agonizing. Each inch brought me closer to the absence. The hum intensified, vibrating in my skull, threatening to shatter the fragile shell of my sanity. I tasted iron again, that coppery residue coating my tongue. It wasn't a physical taste. It was the taste of excitation, of consequence. The edge of the hole was smooth, unnervingly so. I reached out, fingers tracing the circumference. The stone felt warm, almost alive. Like the skin of something sleeping, I dropped the last few inches, landing on solid ground, not earth. Stone, a floor, the library. It wasn't a room. It was a pocket, a space that shouldn't exist. Books lined the walls, reaching toward a ceiling I couldn't see. Not a single speck of dust moated the air. Not a single cobweb draped the shelves. The books themselves weren't decaying. They weren't brittle with age. They were preserved, perfect as if printed yesterday. The air hung thick with the scent of aged paper and something else, lavender, a sickly sweet, cloying fragrance that made my stomach churn. I ran my hand along the spines, the leather cool and smooth under my touch, titles in languages I didn't recognize, symbols I couldn't decipher. The pages felt strangely slick, almost oily. I pulled one from the shelf. The binding didn't creak. It didn't groan. It simply twin-yielded. The pages fell open to a diagram, a complex, intricate illustration of something, a network of lines and circles, pulsing with a faint internal light. The molten lead color of everything seemed to deepen, to coalesce around the image. A drip somewhere water was falling, plink. Plink, each drop echoed over the hum, a deliberate, measured rhythm. It wasn't coming from the ceiling, it was coming from within, the walls. The cats' heads turned away from me, their slate-grey fur stiff with a tension I hadn't noticed before. They didn't look at the books, they looked at the darkness beyond the shelves. Their pupils, those abyssal voids, seemed to expand, swallowing the faint light. I tried to call out, to ask what they saw, but the sound caught in my throat. It wasn't a blockage. It was a suppression. The hum had thickened, wrapping around my voice, stealing the air from my lungs. I opened my mouth, but only a rasping exhale escaped. The air felt thin, suffocating. The ground beneath my feet began to vibrate. Not with the hum, with something else. A grinding, a slow, deliberate scrape of stone against stone. I looked back at the hole, the perfect circle it was, closing. The edges were drawing inward, the stone sliding against itself with a sound like teeth grinding on bone. A low, guttural groan resonated from the walls, a sound that felt ancient and terrible. I scrambled backward, desperate to reach the opening, but it was too late. The stone met, seamless and perfect. The grinding stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. The library was sealed. The cats' heads lowered, their bodies pressing against my legs, their fur felt cold, damp. The weight of Jensen's soul, the guard pressed against my chest, a suffocating weight of guilt and failure. The mask pulsed against my temple, its whisper a cold, insistent pressure. Victim, it breathed, and I understood, not the meaning, but the inevitability. The hole wasn't a door, it was a coffin, and I was already inside. The burden hadn't chosen the farm, it had chosen me. The grinding had ceased, but the stone felt warm, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wasn't a wall, it was a lid. The cessation of the grinding resonated not as silence, but as a deepening of the existing void. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the soot consumption of it. The hum, previously a dull ache, had become viscous, a thick, oily presence, coating the inside of my skull. It felt less like a vibration and more like the pressure of water building behind a dam. Whetstone. That's what it felt like, cold, porous, and saturated, as if the sound itself had seeped into the very structure of the library, becoming part of the stone, the wood, the paper. I risked a glance upward, scanning the unseen ceiling. Or rather scanning for the impression of a ceiling. The darkness wasn't absolute. It wasn't a simple lack of light. It was a through devouring of it. The molten lead color of the books, the stone floor, the mask. Even the grey of the cat's fur seemed to be leaching into the surrounding blackness, losing their definition. The library wasn't merely dim, it was being swine unmayday. The rain, I hadn't noticed it before, not consciously. But now, a faint patter against something. Glass, perhaps, a window. I turned, searching for the source, my eyes straining against the encroaching dark, and there it was! A single pane of glass high in the wall, obscured by grime and streaked with water. It wasn't a window looking freed out. It was a window looking fwinned in, reflecting. My own face stared back at me, or rather the face of the man wearing the mask. The smooth, cold stone, the hollow eyes, the rigid, unyielding expression. But it wasn't just my face. It was layered, distorted, like looking through rippled water, and behind my reflection, another face. Faint, ephemeral, but undeniably there. A flicker of recognition, a ghost of a smile, a memory I couldn't grasp. The cats had moved, not far. They hadn't fled. They hadn't cowered. They had simply shifted. One of the heads, the one closest to me, turned its slate-grey eyes fixing on the reflection. The other head followed, mirroring the movement. Their bodies pressed against my legs, a cold, insistent weight. The scent of them, usually a faint musk, had intensified iron and something else, moss, damp earth. The smell of a grave disturbed. I could feel the weight of Jensen's soul, the guard, pressing against my chest. Not a physical weight, but a psychic one, a suffocating sense of regret, of failure. He hadn't been a good man, Jensen. A petty thief, a liar, a cheat. But he hadn't deserved this. No one deserved this, and yet here I was, wearing his burden, wearing his guilt. The mask pulsed against my temple, a slow, deliberate rhythm. The hum seemed to originate from within the stone, resonating through my teeth. A whisper, not audible, not exactly, but felt. A vibration against the bone. Oh, truth! It wasn't a statement. It was an accusation. The cats didn't look at me. They didn't look at the books. They didn't look at the reflection. They looked to Festi, it into the darkness beyond. Their pupils, those abyssal voids, seemed to expand, swallowing the faint light. They saw something I couldn't, something hidden, something waiting. I tried to speak, to ask what they saw, but the sound caught in my throat. It wasn't a blockage. It was a suppression. The hum had thickened, wrapping around my voice, stealing the air from my lungs. I opened my mouth, but only a rasping exhale escaped. The air felt thin, suffocating, as if the library itself was consuming the oxygen. The two-headed creature began to move. Not with a rush of panic, but with a slow, deliberate grace. Each step silent on the stone floor. They didn't brush against my legs. They flowed around me, their bodies fluid and weightless. They moved toward the reflection, toward the window, toward whatever lay beyond. One of the heads paused, turning back to me. Its eyes met mine. And in that moment I understood. Not the meaning of it all, but the inevitability. The hole wasn't a door. It was a coffin. The library wasn't abandoned. It was a mirror, a reflection of my own hidden guilt. The burden wasn't just mine. It was the accumulated weight of every life I'd ruined. Every mistake I'd made, every lie I'd told. The cats reached the window. They stood before the glass, their heads tilted, their bodies rigid, and then they turned away slowly, deliberately. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. They had delivered their message. The snowfall sound replaced the hum. A delicate ethereal whisper, a cold, distant beauty. It wasn't a reprieve. It was a prelude. The stone felt warm, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wasn't a wall, it was a lid, and I was already buried. The cats moved toward the shelves, their forms dissolving into the darkness. They weren't guarding me. They were abandoning me. The cats' footsteps on the stone floor weren't a scrape or a rustle. They were the delicate, crystalline patter of snowflakes landing on frozen glass. Each step echoed with a sound so pure it felt like the library itself was exhaling, a breath of cold, untouched white. I could almost taste it, the metallic tang of snow on the tongue, the way it settled on my skin like a promise. The molten lead color of the library's stone walls seemed to thicken, coalescing into a viscous, heavy saturation, while the slate grey of the floor deepened into a void that swallowed the last traces of light. The mask pressed against my temple, not cold stone now, but warm lead. vibrating with a rhythm that wasn't sound but pressure, with chosen a whisper that resonated in my molars, not in my ears. The hole in the library's floor, the one that had led me here from the backyard, was closing. Not with a snap, but with the slow, inevitable sealing of a tomb lid, stone grinding against stone in a sound like ice cracking underfoot. I felt it in my bones. The library wasn't a place anymore. It was the burden made manifest. The weight of every lie I'd carried for Jensen, for every soul I'd failed. The snowfall sound. The only thing left in the universe wasn't falling. It was sooty inside me, a cold, pure melody that drowned out the last remnants of the hum. I'd carried the truth too long, and now it was turning to lead, molten and heavy, seeping into my veins. The cats were gone from my legs, their cold, insistent weight replaced by the suffocating silence of the stone. I looked down. The library floor was no longer stone. It was liquid lead, swirling with the faintest streaks of slate grey reflecting nothing. The snowfall sound sharpened, a single clear chime from the last step the cats had taken, echoing in the silence. Then the darkness, not empty but thick, oily molten lead closing over my head. I didn't gasp. I didn't move. The library had become the coffin, the stone the lid, and the snowfall sound. The only thing left was the final crystalline note before the silence. The cat's last step had been the final note, and now the darkness swallowed me whole.